Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And before we launch into today's story, I realized how long it's been since we have mentioned the Facebook group.
We have a Facebook group?
Yes. So both of our lives have been a little extra busy the past month or so, I think. And we kind of forgot to mention it. So not only do we have a Facebook group, but we have two brand new members this past week. Sylvia Warren. I want to welcome both of them. Sylvia Warren and it's either Ida or Ida. I don't want to completely botch your name, so I'll just say both of them. Madsen, who I believe is another Swede to the pile. I think you might actually be friends with Nils based on your profile picture. So there's that. But welcome to both of you. We look forward to hearing from both of you more, and we look forward to actually hanging out there more and talking a little more. So
absolutely, and it's great that we seem to have doubled our Swede population. That meets a goal.
That's our strategic goal for the year.
Yes.
Swedes too. So if you have not checked out the Facebook group, please come by. The easiest ways to get there are probably to go to our Facebook page, which is So Here's My Story. There's a link right there that takes you right to the SHMS podcast community group. You can find a link right at the top of the page at our regular website, which is sohere'smystory.com. And if you want to find one other way to get there, I believe that texting the word story to 345-345 also works from Canada now. It used to only work in the US, but I think it works. I think it Canadian works now.
Nice. Nice.
So anyway, so we would love to see you over there. Hop in, introduce yourself, and that's it. So,
okay.
Want to get started?
I do. Let me thank our sponsors, Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions.
All right, take it away.
Okay. So here's my story. And my story is actually brought to you by current events.
Oh, okay.
Yes, because...
I thought you were going to announce a new sponsor or something. Brought to you by Kellogg's.
No, there are a couple stories in the news that seem to follow you everywhere, and I see them on my feed, and I talk to people about them, and just hear other people talking about them wherever I go. And so the one that had me thinking most recently was this story about the restaurant in Virginia, I believe it was, called the Red Hen, at which Sarah Huckabee Sanders, President Trump's press secretary, went to eat and was shown the door. The owner had said to her that she wasn't welcome in the restaurant. And it's not my purpose, nor is it the purpose of this podcast, to get political. So, I'm not going to discuss the various sides of the issue from a political point of view. But it got me thinking about this from a business perspective, because what the owner had decided is that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, what she does for a living or how she comports herself or what her political or personal philosophies are, don't fit with what this owner envisioned for her restaurant, whether it was atmosphere or whether it was the philosophy or workforce, whatever it was. There was no fit there, and to such an extent that they were not going to break bread together. The dispute between them, or the gap between them, was so pronounced that the owner decided that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was not welcome in the establishment. And so it got me thinking from a business perspective about the pros and cons and the limitations of the concept of fit, because when I speak to clients and HR professionals and I read blogs, I'm always hearing about, well, the most important thing to do is to hire for fit. You've got to hire for fit. They have to fit with who you are, your core values or your culture. And I agree with that to some extent.
And we've also talked about that in terms of clients. Like our Safe Word is Cinnamon episode was about you accepting clients by fit, which, certainly ties into the...
Right. And so there are a lot of positive aspects to this notion of fit. But there's negative as well, because anybody who's ever been discriminated against, I think, could also tell you that, well, fit can be a code word to we don't hire women for management positions, or we don't have gay people here, or
yeah. I mean, it is a sword that can cut in several directions.
It can.
Yeah.
And so what that also put me in mind of was an interview I had several years ago with a marketing person. She was interviewing for an internship position. She was a junior at Towson University at the time. And she came in and she was nicely dressed. You know, she was wearing dark jeans and a blazer. So she came in to interview at my law firm. She didn't look like a lawyer, but she did look like a professional. And she had a crimson streak in her hair, and she was wearing a nose ring. Do you wear a nose ring? Do you sport a nose ring?
I do not.
Not you, but does one
you're asking
wear
what's
a
the
nose
verb?
ring?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Has
but
a nose
she had a nose ring. So the conversation was going really well. And I asked her, not to be judgy, but just because I was curious. I said, you know, you came in today to interview at a law firm, and it's a business law firm. And you can take out the nose ring if you want, right? It's not like permanently affixed. And she said, yeah, I can take it out. And I said, so what was your thinking of keeping it in? And by saying that, I knew that I could come off as judgy, and I really wasn't. I was just really curious. I wanted to find out what her thought was. And what she said to me was, well, I did think about not wearing it, but then I thought that if having this nose ring is the difference between getting a job and not getting the job, it's not a job I wanted anyway. So she was looking for her own fit. And what she meant by that was that everybody who interviewed her or worked in the establishment didn't have to themselves have a nose ring.
Right.
But they had to be accepting. It had to be okay.
Or at least she didn't want to be at a place where it would be the reason she didn't get it.
Right. It would be so
hired,
intolerable that she was disqualified immediately, regardless of how well she could do the aspects of the job.
Right.
And, you know, the bottom line is, she worked here for over a year, long past the internship period had ended, and I loved having her. She was wonderful. And I was very
Did she wear her nose ring here?
She did.
Yeah. Okay. So that wasn't a big deal for you.
No, it wasn't a big deal for me. And I do question, okay, if she was interviewing to be an attorney and she was going to see certain clients, maybe that might be different.
Would your opinion
I just
changed? Maybe
had a different view because she's a marketing person, and as opposed to one of my attorneys who's seeing CEOs of small and mid-sized businesses. But it wasn't a deal breaker for me at all.
Well, and interestingly, I think the fact that you two had that conversation, that you were curious about her thought process. I know you well enough to know that you didn't even say, does that thing come out, because you wanted it to come out. You're just curious, like, about her thought process. She wouldn't know that yet. The fact that she could say, yep, I thought about it and here's what I decided, and that you two had that conversation in and of itself is a fit test. You know, that says here are two people who hold honesty and fit to be a high, and curiosity and authenticity, or whatever, you know, whatever words you want to put on it, you hold a high value of that. That in of itself says something. Just
right. Because if she had said, you know what, I really don't appreciate your attitude about this, it comes out, but if that's your problem, then I'm out of here. And she storms out, you know, then we can't have it. Then the absence of fit is not the nose ring. It's the inability to have a conversation. It's funny. I was assisting a client and doing some hiring, and they got a deluge of people for this job. And we were trying to go through them as quickly as possible. We didn't want to, we thought we found somebody, but we wanted to be sure. And we didn't immediately want to say to these people, sorry, we found someone. We were waiting a little bit, and maybe we waited a little bit too long. We could have at least said, like, hey, we're in the process. But we were trying to respond to everyone. And there was someone who we just, for better or for worse, whether it was on us or not, had not gotten back to that person yet to just kind of update them where we were and whatever. And they were somebody who frankly was kind of marginally even being considered anyway. They didn't really have the right experience, but that's not even the point. They responded with this really passive aggressive, well, I guess I didn't get the job since I hadn't heard from you. I'll have to stop by to meet who you did hire. Clearly I could learn something from them, or something like that. And I was like, wow, thanks for making that decision easy. But that's the thing. Like, they may have been amazing at the job. Like, maybe we were making a bad choice. Maybe they would have been way better at the job.
But that role of fit that that you are someone who would handle a situation like that by throwing that kind of response back is such that's one kind of fit that I look for, is like, how do you have conversations, is, because that's something I value. So for me, that is a kind of fit.
Right. And as a matter of fact, she could have been perfect for the next job opening you had, which really fit her skills. But
for all she knew, in this process, we decided we really needed 2 people.
Yeah.
And, and that she, so it's just, that's sort of taking off on a tangent, but it comes back to the fact that you and I both value being able to have conversations that dig into things. And so it just sort of points out that kind of fit with her is probably part of why you got along so well.
Right. But, so what I'm curious about, and that's true. So that's one of my core values, just the ability to have this conversation. But what I'm curious about is your experience, because I know you facilitate a lot with teams, management teams, et cetera. And so you have all of these people sitting around a table. And I'm sure you've had those experiences of one of these things is not like the others. And sometimes I would suspect that sometimes that's a great thing because you have these different viewpoints, and sometimes it's just a train wreck and you can see it. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the limits of fit, when it's good, when it's not.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I almost I love that we do this spontaneously, and I almost wish I'd had some advance notice to think this through, because it's a really complicated thing.
Yeah.
What doesn't work is having one homogenous glob of the exact same person at a table to lead a company, because you need, one of the companies that I facilitated their leadership team meetings for years, incredibly creative, like really progressively creative, just thinky. I don't even know the words for it. Like, these people talk about out of the box. Like,
I'd stick with thinky.
Yeah, thinky. Yeah, super thinky, out of the boxy. Kind of thinkers. And that was why they were so great at what they did. And that was important. The person who sometimes felt one of these things is not like the other was the accounting person. And, because that person, often it could feel like that person was like sticking their oar in the water all the time. But the fact of the matter is, you don't want your financial person being like creative and boundaryless.
Let's do it, guys.
And hey, we don't need a contract. Let's just roll. Like that's their role. So there's matching up fit for the role versus fit for the company. I think fit can be a scapegoat when it's like the thing that means you just don't have to try to get along with different kinds of people. There's so much value in diversity of background and perspective and whatnot that fit, like you said, it can't be intentional or unintentional code for just hiring people like me.
Right. That look like me, that come from where I come from.
Yeah. And even if you like to think you're not that kind of person, the fact of the matter is you're probably just naturally more at ease with people who like understand the things
familiar to you.
Yeah. Who are familiar to you. So they're going to feel better. So fit can be incredibly dangerous, but not fit, things that do make bone on bone kind of things. And I don't even know, I'll be really interested to explore this with you here and see if we can put it into categories, because I haven't really thought about it this much, but I what's that porn quote? Like, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Like, there are kinds of fit that just don't feel right. I mean, for instance, that story I told about the woman who replied, that's a kind of not fit that would have added a certain layer of toxicity to the team that came in. And that's a deal breaker. Like, you can't bring something that adds toxicity. So that's one kind of deal breakery fit thing. But there's also, I love that you pointed out that because this is an important part of the conversation. This is where hiring from both sides, being the hirer and the hiree, the person applying to the job, the applicant. There you go. That's a word. There you go. I get there. Being fit. This is why it often feels like dating metaphors are so applicable, because when you're the person coming into the job, it's easy, and a little bit from the other side, but more when you're coming to get the job. It's easy for it to feel like a first date, that you want to like, oh, I hope this works out. I really want to get this job. And you can forget to pay attention to things of fit that then put you into a place where you don't fit. And that's as bad for the person coming in as it is for the company. So I love that you brought up that aspect of being as conscious and okay with like, this isn't a good fit, which isn't always apparent at the interview stage. I had a friend who said, he used to say, like, if your company values, your core values aren't clear enough, that some people might say, no, thanks, not for me. that they're not clear enough, if you can't hire and fire by them, and if people can't get I think we've talked about this before, like Amazon, as much flack as it gets for being like a terrible place to work. If that's the kind of environment that works for you, that's great. But it's clear enough. You could be like, I don't want to be in that kind of environment, that like cutthroat environment.
I think the context in which we talked about it was I had said to a client who was very upset at his staff that seemed to rebel en masse against one of his initiatives, and the self-appointed spokesperson for the staff came to him and said, "Well, that's not who we are." And I said, that's the greatest thing that somebody can say to you, because that means you are somebody.
Yeah. There's direction there. There's clarity.
There's direction. There's clarity. What I often tell my public speaking class is that, everybody likes vanilla, but nobody loves vanilla. So
that's a really great, that might have to be the title. Nobody loves
vanilla. But if your team can say that's not who we are, I think that's a really good thing. And I also think that if it doesn't even come across a little bit in your interview with who we are and that's not who we are, then you're doing your interview wrong.
Well, okay. And I have a great little quick story for that I may have actually told on this podcast before, but you're going to hear it again, which frankly is what it means to be friends with me. So you will hear my stories more than a few times.
Really?
Yeah. Had you not noticed that?
I did not. No.
Thank you for acting surprised. But I will, before I go into it though, because it does come back to the hiring thing. It's interesting, the article, or at least one of the articles that I had read about the Red Hen incident was that it wasn't just her, that she had spoken to the staff, and she actually said, what do you want to do? How do you want me to handle this? Like they were a big part of making the decision, or not even making the decision, but to them, it felt like that's not who we are, that it was coming up out of the organization. To me, it's like when you're really doing well, when the company feels like it has its own person, it has its own fit, like it's its own person with its own core values and its own personality and its own likes and dislikes. Like I think that's when you've done it really well, when the we of that's not who we are feels like a thing that is, maybe this is where fit is so, sorry, my bad, I'm getting all excited now. That's I think where the conversation of fit gets really valuable. If fit starts to look like, does each individual match perfectly with each individual? That's where you're at really big risk of having something homogenous and dangerously not diverse. But if there is this entity that is this other entity that is the company, that it really feels like another person, and all the people match with enough parts of that for fit. That's where I think you can have a much broader and more diverse staff, but that there's something that there's some campfire you can all be around that feels like a match. So I'll tell you this hiring story because I think it might actually kind of play into this a little bit. I was interviewing when I was at the architecture firm very early on. I was hiring an admin and I was interviewing her, and it was, we had one of our big core values at that firm was work hard, play hard. We worked really, really, really hard. And then we also really enjoyed each other when that opportunity was there. And one of the things we did was this Friday happy hour where sometimes we'd just hang around and talk. Sometimes there'd be like, we'd pin up a project and review it, and everyone got to weigh in. Didn't matter if you're an architect or not. You'd ask questions and be like, why is that? That doesn't make any sense. And it was really fun and nourishing to the culture of the firm. And we would have beer, that was our Friday happy hour.
Gasp.
Yeah. And we would start at like 3:30 or 4, whatever, on Friday. So I was interviewing this person and she happened to be there. And the way our conference room were set up, the little kitchen that we had was sort of off this one conference room. So one of the principals came in to get a couple 6-packs out of the fridge, and, being funny, and this is just how he is, he joked with the person that I was interviewing and said, yeah, do you want a beer? And she was like, no, thank you. And she left, and he left, and we finished the interview. Well, shortly thereafter, I get a call from the recruiter who had sent her over that she was deeply, deeply offended that she had been offered a beer at work and that we were drinking in the office, and that she was like, they were all drunk, and which we weren't. We like literally had just sat down, but everyone was laughing.
But she viewed it through her prism.
To her, it felt really awful.
Yeah.
And first of all, I was my first reaction was I was embarrassed because I would never want somebody to feel that uncomfortable. And I didn't pick up on it in the moment, which felt like a dropped ball. And at first I was like, why did he do that? But then I paused for a second and I was like, thank God.
Yeah, that was incredibly revealing.
That came out because she was actually, I think she could have been really good for the job. And here's where I draw that distinction. No one has to drink. No one is even there are plenty of people who worked at the firm who never had a beer, never. But if you're going to be bothered by it, and then that becomes this tension point where everyone's going to be a little bit nervous because they know she doesn't approve, and it's just going to create this like kind of feeling in the space. That's where fit is, and not just for us, but for her. I don't want someone there who's going to be really uncomfortable with something that's just kind of
deeply
part of
offended by part of the culture.
Yeah, by part of the culture, and I struggle with that a little bit because it felt like I was saying like, oh, somebody has to be like a certain way, but I was like, no, it's just we're responsible about it. We're safe about it. It's not overdone. Like I feel good about the way it weaves into this company, and that has to be a place where I'm okay with people saying that's not for me. So from then on out, I would mention it in interviews, and people are always very confused why I felt the need to be like, we have happy hour on Friday. If you're not, they're like,
well, we used to. One of my law partners at a former firm used to, in the interviews, one of his last. It wasn't even a question. Well, I guess it was a question. He would say, so we use salty language. Is that going to offend you? Yeah. Now I think in an interview when somebody really wants the job, they're like, no. But his point was really, if, that's how he spoke and he would argue, you'd hear him yelling and all that, not at people, but opposing counsel or whatever on the phone. That's kind of how he spoke in casual conversation.
I think it kind of, to go back to the dating metaphors for a minute, to me, I think where I draw the line of where it's a good thing and where it can become a really dangerous thing is both of you knowing better your kind of two things, either deal breaker issues or things that are going to ask you to, either one of you, to be someone you're not. And so back to the dating thing, certainly on your first date, it's not usually like the thing you immediately want to discuss of like, so how do you feel about children? Do you want to have kids? Do you not want to have kids? But if that's a deal breaker issue, maybe not the first date, but you're not going to want to wait until you're getting engaged to find out that you're on, if that's a big issue for you, that you're on different pages.
No, that's true. But I think that, and I think there is a lot to that dating metaphor, but I think the point that you raised, which I really like, is that the dating thing is a one-on-one, and one-on-one with fit can expose you to more danger zones because I only want this person that's like me, which is valid perhaps in dating, but not valid in hiring. But what you had said was that when the individuals come together to form this other entity, and, the fit has to be with some facet of that entity. It reminds me of when you have really well-drawn characters in a play or a TV series or a movie. And then sometimes you hear the actor that plays that character saying, my character would never do that. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like that, because if your staff can think of the whole entity that's been created by your culture and where you are and your products and your customers, et cetera, and have a sense of what my character, what that thing would do or wouldn't do, I think you've been successful in creating a fit. And going back to the Red Hen, I didn't know that. I didn't read the article that she had talked to her staff. And there's an argument to be made that, well, why? Because a leader's role, if nothing else, is to put a stake in the ground and say, this is where we're going.
But I think she had, and that's anyway.
But she talked to her staff, and they decided apparently that no, as a company, this is what we stand for, and we're not going to embrace people who are so outside of our mindset. And that's the decision that they made. Right. But I just think it's instructive, and each company, each entity has to make that for themselves.
Well, so I have one client who has a value that has this list of core values that I have heard their people lean on for decision-making skills. So whereas like sometimes, if you have a company set of core values that are like integrity and excellence, like they're not that. I wish we had a picture of that look on your face when I said that. It's not that there's anything, it's not that you're going to have a value of not integrity, but the fact is it doesn't like guide much.
No.
Whereas they have this value of honest and caring. And it's one thing, keep in mind, like they're not honesty and caring. It's a thing, because that what they're pointing to is that place where like being honest doesn't always feel like being nice necessarily, or like swishing things under the rug, but it also doesn't have to look like, scorching the earth. You can be honest and caring.
And it comes from a caring place. Or because there's something more important than like that what feels like is right in front of you. And I have heard multiple people say, well, there was this conversation I kind of wanted to avoid, but I knew I had to maintain this. I knew I needed to be honest and caring, because when it starts to feel bigger than any one individual, I think that's where fit really starts to fit. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
Lovingly
snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.